In the year 1870, the papacy, or the Vatican, declared a doctrine of papal infallibility. In the Wikipedia article on this topic, we get a brief overview of this basic concept, likely written by an attorney. In the doctrine, Nature of Infallibility, the Church teaches that infallibility is a charism entrusted by Christ to the whole Church, whereby the Pope, as head of the College of Bishops, enjoys papal infallibility. This charism is the supreme degree of participating in Christ's divine authority, which, in the New Covenant, so as to safeguard the faithful from defection and guarantee the profession of faith, ensures the faithful abide in the truth. The Church teaches that divine assistance is also given to the Pope when he exercises his ordinary magisterium. And of course, in this paragraph, charism has a similar root as charisma, and this is declaring in so many words authority or ownership, shall we say, over essentially humanity. I would say that it's specifically related to Christians, but as you notice, or you might notice, there are words in here that, such as a profession of faith and the faithful. These are intentionally vague terms. And if we read further, we get a better idea. Conditions for teachings being declared infallible. According to the teaching of the First Vatican Council and Catholic tradition, the conditions required for ex cathedra papal teachings are as follows. The Roman Pontiff, the Pope alone or with the College of Bishops. 2. Speaks ex cathedra, that is, when in the discharge of the office as shepherd and teacher of all Christians, and by virtue of his supreme apostolic authority, he defines a doctrine concerning faith or morals to be held by the whole Church. The terminology of a definitive decree usually makes clear that this last condition is fulfilled, as through a formula such as by the authority of our God Lord Jesus Christ and of the blessed apostles Peter and Paul, and by our own authority we declare, pronounce, and define the doctrine to be revealed by God as such to be firmly and immutably held by all the faithful, or through an accompanying anathema stating that anyone who deliberately dissents is outside the Catholic Church. Now in the next part we look at the overview of the papal infallibility doctrine, which is really not complicated, but they codify the basic concept of claiming ownership in legalese, shall we say. Papal infallibility is a dogma of the Catholic Church which states that, in virtue of the promise of Jesus to Peter, the Pope, when he speaks ex cathedra, is preserved from the possibility of error on doctrine initially given to the Apostolic Church and handed down in Scripture and tradition. It does not mean that the Pope cannot sin or otherwise err in most situations. Now, what this paragraph is stating is that although it will not admit that a human being cannot make mistakes, it's saying that it's using the mantle of tradition and custom to state that the Pope cannot be held liable for errors and mistakes. That's the important part there. Now in the second paragraph, this doctrine defined dogmatically at the First Vatican Council of 1869 through 1870, there's our date, in the document Pastor Aeternus, or eternal pastor, shepherd, is claimed to have existed in medieval theology and to have been the majority opinion at the time of the Counter-Reformation. Now they're using the idea of legal and lawful tradition or custom to state that because it was done in the past, so it shall be, and that might not necessarily be true, but that is usually how the sandbox of authoritarians work. The doctrine of infallibility relies on one of the cornerstones of Catholic dogma, that of papal supremacy, whereby the authority of the Pope is the ruling agent as to what are accepted as formal beliefs in the Catholic Church. The use of this power is referred to as speaking ex cathedra. Any doctrine or faith or morals issued by the Pope in his capacity as successor to St. Peter, speaking as pastor and teacher of the Church Universal, Ecclesia Catholica, and known in this part, ecclesia is a word that is derived from the Greek ekklesia, which means a governing body, or the social democracy of Athens. From the seat of, and in continuation, from the seat of his episcopal authority in Rome, and meant to be believed by the Universal Church, has the special status of an ex cathedra statement. Vatican Council I in 1870 declared that any such ex cathedra doctrines have the character of infallibility. Section 4, Constitution of the Church 4. And this is where we get the declaration and the origin of canon law, which is, a canon is a repeated verse in a musical or literary sense, and it actually applies the same to law, where all of our laws are canons or repetitions of Vatican law. And this was done in 1873 under the Declaration of Papal Infallibility. Now in the next part, Magisterium, which has a coordinating term, magistrate, where we see the idea of priest judges ruling over us and executing canon law of the Vatican. In the Catholic Church, the word magisterium refers to the teaching authority of the Church. This authority is understood to be embodied in the episcopacy, which is the aggregation of the current bishops of the Church, led by the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, who has authority over the bishops, individually and as a body, as well as over each and every Catholic directly. The apostolic primacy, which the Roman pontiff possesses as successor of Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, includes also the supreme power of teaching. Notice the word, the Prince of the Apostles. Very strange that they apply that title. This Holy See has always maintained this. The constant custom of the Church demonstrates it, and the ecumenical councils, particularly those in which East and West met in the union of faith and charity, have declared it. Ex cathedra, literally from the chair, or shall we say, throne, a theological term which signifies authoritative teaching and is more particularly applied to the definitions given by the Roman pontiff. There is a distinction between the solemn magisterium and the ordinary magisterium. When the Pope issues a dogmatic definition, he is speaking ex cathedra in an exercise of the solemn magisterium. The second form of church teaching, the ordinary magisterium, is continually exercised by the Church, especially in her universal teaching regarding with faith and morals. For a papal statement to be considered ex cathedra, it must be made by the Pope as supreme teacher and pastor of the entire Church. It must be on a matter of faith and morals, and it must be definitive and applicable to the universal Church. Now, two elements of modern law and life that verify in a corroborative nature this statement, or the obvious control that the Vatican possesses over the globe, is the banning of the sale of alcohol on Sundays, which should not be followed, but is, because the Vatican uses force and murder and things like that to uphold its dogma. But another thing that is very telling is that if you went to China, Chinese license plates are not in Chinese. And also, of course, the easiest way to notice how laws are all canon of the Vatican's doctrine is the fact that most laws are written in Latin, such as amicus brief, which means friend of the court, and we will look at that later in this video. In the next part, Petrine and Papal Primacy. There is general agreement among scholars, notice that device, used by propagandists and synonymous with a reasonable person. They say there's a general agreement. Yeah, okay. So there's general agreement among scholars on the preeminence that the historical Peter held among the disciples of Jesus, making him the most prominent and influential member of the 12 during Jesus' ministry and in the early church. And here's how they're attempting to explain that Peter was a prince, which could have been, but the fact is that Jesus himself was of the tribe of Judah, meaning true royal bloodline, of which none of the royal houses today have any royal blood in them. And as far as I believe, but then again, the church does obfuscate these things, I don't believe that Peter had any blood from any of the royal tribes or whatnot. Anyway, it was to Simon alone, to whom he had already said, "You shall be called Cephas," that the Lord spoke these words, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the underworld shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Of course, nowhere in that passage does it state that Peter is of the tribe of Judah or any other tribes or royal bloodlines of actual royalty or customary and tradition and all that. If you follow that idea, that is, or concept of royal bloodlines. Next paragraph, the primacy of Simon Peter is essential to the vision of papal primacy as papal supremacy. That is the idea that the papacy, by divine institution, enjoys delegated authority from Jesus over the entire church. Ha, that's called fraud. That's such a lie. Just they're adopting words and playing games with them. The primacy of the Bishop of Rome over the whole Catholic Church is derived from the Pope's status as successor to Peter as Prince of the Apostles and as Vicar of Christ, or Vicarius Christi. Now notice, Vicarius Christi would not actually translate to Vicar of Christ and has a similar origin as the word victorious. So this would probably be more accurate to say it is victory over Christians, or followers of Christ. Although, which Christ would be the question. The First Vatican Council defined papal primacy in the sense of papal supremacy as an essential institution of the Church that can never be relinquished. Yeah, okay. We come to the concept of Pastor Eternus, or Eternal Shepherd. First dogmatic constitution of the Church of Christ was issued by the First Vatican Council, July 18, 1870. The document defines 4 doctrines of the Catholic faith: the apostolic primacy conferred on Peter, the perpetuity of the Petrine primacy in the Roman pontiffs, the definition of the papal primacy as a papal supremacy, and papal infallibility, infallible teaching, authority, magisterium of the Pope. Perpetuity, by the way, means forever. In perpetuity means forever, never ending, without end, all of that. And it is no surprise that on October 6th, 1870, Rome becomes the capital of unified Italy. Strange, considering they seem to have conquered papal territory. That couldn't possibly be a misdirection there. And then also, on this date, this mysterious and highly misrepresented event happened in June 21st, 1870 in China, called the Tianjin Massacre. Of course, this is represented as being a massacre of, quote, Catholics, when in fact the massacre was actually conducted against the Chinese by the Vatican-controlled government. On June 21st, 1870, in Tianjin or Tianjin, China, a violent outbreak of Chinese xenophobic, there we go with the labels, sentiment that nearly precipitated international warfare and signaled the end of the, quote, cooperative policy between China and the Western treaty powers. That treaty they're referring to, by the way, is the Treaty of 1871. Likely, and other treaties too. Before the incident, rumors circulated in Tianjin that the French Sisters of Charity were kidnapping and mutilating Chinese children. Of course, to comment on that, of course, they had to be rumors because, as we all know, nuns and priests do not have a history or track record of abusing children. Absolutely not. Wonder where they got that rather fictional idea or rumor, as it's stated here. Hostility mounted, and on June 21st, the French consul, Henri Fontanier, fired into a crowd of locally prominent representatives, missing the district magistrate by killing his servant. Immediately, the consul and some 20 others, mostly French, were killed and mutilated by the mob. As usual, what happened in reality has to be different than what they're describing here. Too many things that could not have happened in that way in a logical and realistic sense. Now, also in this year, 1870, the Japanese yen currency is introduced to supersede the mon. And there we get an indicator of financial conquest, something well known among banker priest circles such as the Knights Templar and whatnot. Also in this year, the Diggers' Republic was established, and that was an alleged republic of the working class in South Africa. Of course, we get a true idea of what this purpose was when it says, by December of the same year, about 10,000... Oh, no, it's in the part above. It says, factions in the Republic also implored the British Empire to impose its authority and annex the territory. Yeah, okay. What newly formed independent republic would then call to become dependent upon? Unless, of course, they were never really independent and it's just a shell game, as we've seen done many times. And of course, in this year, or in this period, we look at the Second Boer War, which was instigated based off of previous events, such as the so-called Diggers' Republic calling for intervention from the British. Yeah, that's not looking for pretext for domination, then I don't know what you'd call that, other than, I guess, intervention. Anyway, during the Second Boer War, which lasted from 1899 to 1902, the British operated concentration camps in South Africa. The term concentration camp grew in prominence during that period. The camps had originally been set up by the British Army as refugee camps in order to provide refuge for civilian families who had been forced to abandon their homes for any reason which was related to the war. So, in this paragraph, what we get the idea of is that they built these camps to corral, collect, and imprison those that had been forced to relocate because of the war that had been inflicted by the people that set up these camps. And of course, they did this, as usual, for the safety of the public. Haven't heard that one before, have we? When we look at the next part, we find out that it is, of course, a conspiracy theory when we talk about the FEMA camps. And it says that the FEMA camps conspiracy theory is a belief, particularly within the American Patriot movement, that the United States Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, is planning to imprison U.S. citizens in concentration camps following the imposition of martial law in the United States after a major disaster or crisis. Of course, this portion requires a little bit of explanation, because most would probably not say that they expect FEMA agents, mostly overweight or incompetent and incapable people, or ignorant, to do this. No. The belief is usually that an intervention of armed forces, likely from the UN, would come in and use these FEMA camps in the same way that the British military used the concentration camps in South Africa, which of course, ironically, the concentration camps were originated by the British, but then we have to believe that they dismantled the ones in Germany. Yeah, that's likely. In some versions of the theory, only suspected dissidents will be imprisoned. In more extreme versions, a large number of U.S. citizens will be imprisoned for the purposes of extermination as a new world order is established. The theory has existed since the late 1970s, but its circulation has increased with the advent of the internet and social media platforms. The existence of FEMA concentration camps has been debunked, of course. Although the U.S. government previously interned U.S. citizens in concentration camps during World War II and developed, but did not implement contingency plans for mass internment of U.S. citizens in the 1980s. And of course, the U.S. government has no track record of, I don't know, poisoning or conducting strange human experiments or doing any of that stuff. And of course, naturally, they say the U.S. government so that it's a faceless entity that can't be held accountable, and that they weren't real individuals carrying these plans out or whatnot. Also in this year, November 12th, Dresdner Bank is founded in Germany. And if more events are looked into in this year, we will also find other financial related operations being conducted. Also in this year, the Paris Commune was established. And this bears a striking resemblance to the intentions of Antifa in recent years, where they instigate chaos and then request intervention or are used as a pretext for intervention so that the true perpetrators, that being individual people that get fed up with tyranny, can be suppressed in a way that it doesn't look like authoritarians are doing what they're actually doing. And so in the Paris Commune Wikipedia article, we see the Paris Commune was a revolutionary government that seized power in Paris, the capital of France, from 18 March to 28 May 1871. That also coincides with the Treaty of 1871, which was discussed in a previous video. But it is also interesting that most don't think about the word revolution. Now, revolution is a circle. Food for thought. During the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, the French National Guard had defended Paris, and working-class radicalism grew among its soldiers. Following the establishment of the Third Republic in September 1870 under French Chief Executive Adolphe Thiers, wow, that's not an ironic name, from February 1871, and the complete defeat of the French army by the Germans by March 1871, soldiers of the National Guard seized control of the city on March 18th. They killed 2 French army generals and refused to accept the authority of the Third Republic, instead attempting to establish an independent government. This sounds like something similar that happened in, I believe it was Portland, Oregon, or it could have been Seattle, Washington. Don't quite remember. 2020, Antifa. The Commune governed Paris for 2 months, establishing policies that tended toward a progressive, anti-religious system of social democracy, including the separation of church and state, self-policing, the remission of rent, the abolition of child labor, and the right of employees to take over an enterprise deserted by its owner. Of course, this is all ironic labeling and propaganda, but the social democracy, of course, there is referring to socialists, which usually means using people as a ruler to rule, which is the origin of the word democracy, which is rule by the people, meaning using the people as a bludgeon against others that are dissidents and or dissent from the narrative. And of course, as we know, there's no true separation of church and state. That's simply referring to the shown or demonstrated separation of church and state, while the church secretly runs things from behind the scenes, such as with the separation of Rockefeller Sr. from the Johns Hopkins Hospital, where his son told him that he shouldn't be seen operating it, but should operate it from the shadows, essentially. It's called having like a cat's paw and all that type of stuff, and of course that could be found in the Rockefeller biography, which is filled with a lot of lies and misinformation. But the Roman Catholic churches and schools were closed. Feminist, socialist, communist, and anarchist currents played important roles in the commune. However, the various communards had little more than 2 months to achieve their objectives, or their goals. And they were probably much smaller than presented, just as with Antifa and the so-called Black Lives Matter movement, which wasn't really a movement, more like a instigated insurrection, I suppose is about the only word that applies. Juan Prim y Prats, 1st Count of Rus, 1st Marquis de los Castillejos, and 1st Viscount of Brooke, was assassinated 6 December 1814, 30 December 1870, was a Spanish general and statesman who was briefly Prime Minister of Spain until his assassination. And of course he was assassinated in 1870. And then the workshop of metalworker Placido Zulago was commissioned to make a monumental sarcophagus for Prim, completed in 1875 in Eibar. This now resides in the cemetery at Rus, or Reus, however you say that. And then also in 1870, the National Weather Service was brought into existence. National Weather Service, NWS, is an agency of the United States federal government and is tasked with providing weather forecasts, warning or hazardous weather, and other weather-related products. Notice that part, other weather-related products, to organizations and the public for the purposes of protection, safety, and general information. Wonder what they mean by safety and protection there. It is a part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, branch of the Department of Commerce, and is headquartered in Silver Spring, Maryland, within the Washington metropolitan area. The agency was known as the United States Weather Bureau from 1890 until it adopted its current name in 1970. The NWS performs its primary task through a collection of national and regional centers and 122 local weather forecast offices, WFOs. As the NWS is an agency of the U.S. federal government, most of its products are in the public domain and available for free of charge. Notice it says most of its products, makes you wonder which products are not in the public domain. And also, it is interesting that it is a part of the Department of Commerce. It's not strange. Then we look at the Solicitor General of the United States. And here we get a example of the connection between canon law from the Vatican ruling the United States, the allegedly independent United States. The Solicitor General of the United States is the 4th highest ranking official in the United States Department of Justice. Elizabeth Prelogar has been serving in the role since October 28, 2021. The United States Solicitor General represents the federal government of the United States before the Supreme Court of the United States. The Solicitor General determines the legal position that the United States will take in the Supreme Court, in addition to supervising and conducting cases in which the government is a party. The Office of the Solicitor General also files amicus curiae briefs in cases in which the federal government has a significant interest. Of course, notice this says amicus curiae. Like the Vatican Curie and other similar uses of that word. And then, of course, if we look at the flag of the Solicitor General, we get a red flag. Red is the color of war, or blood leaving the body. But it also has 4 5-pointed stars in each corner. What could that possibly mean? And then it has the terms qui pro domina justitia sequitur. Notice Latin. And then in our next part, in the year 1870, the Ohio Canon Act was passed. And this is what formed the basis of Ohio State University's land grant. To understand this better, let's look at some information on this. In the Columbus Dispatch, in an article, it states, as Ohio State marks 150 years, has its land grant mission evolved? In the article, it says 150 years ago, this year, legislation paved the way for a new agricultural college on a patch of Franklin County farmland. That is, of course, the Ohio Canon Act. The Canon Act created the Ohio Agriculture and Mechanical College to receive funds made available through the Memorial Act. So many acts, kind of looks like money laundering. Signed by President Abraham Lincoln 8 years earlier. What a surprise. The college was one of dozens of land grant institutions that received funds from the sale of federal land and were meant to serve the industrial class with education in agriculture, mechanical arts, and military tactics. The institution we know today as Ohio State University has come a long way since just 7 faculty members and 24 students enrolled on the first day. In a century and a half, that once fledgling agricultural college was grown to one of the largest universities in the country, with more than 61,000 students at its main Columbus campus, nearly 50,000 faculty members, staff, and employees, and 500,000 living alumni all over the globe. Now that reads like a report of forces that a military commander might receive. And that is because it is very obvious that the land grant is a concept or a operation for conquest, and is of course stated in this middle paragraph briefly that it was designed for mechanical arts and military tactics. And then when we look at some other sources that talk about the land grant mission, they codify this idea for us in so many words as always. The UA's land grant mission, its contemporary relevance, Tuesday, August 28, 2012, the often evoked land grant mission represents the foundational basis for the University of Arizona's bond with Arizona communities, along with its efforts to expand educational opportunities while helping to address important societal concerns. And then at the OSU Writing Center, land grant mission, the Writing Center. The 3 primary values of land grant institutions are research, instruction, and outreach/extension. At the Oklahoma State University Writing Center, we embrace all 3 components of the land grant mission. Instruction occurs in our sessions as both the tutor and writer work together and learn from each other in our table sessions. Of course, this OSU is the commonly confused with the other OSU. One is Oklahoma State University and the other is Ohio State University. The previous article was from the Ohio State University. And then with the Wikipedia article, the mission of the land grant universities was expanded by the Hatch Act